I didn't think I did growing up. I don't think any of our kids think they're happy until they get to be older and they compare themselves to other children who are not having happy childhoods. And they can look back as an adult and say, yes, I had a happy childhood, or no, I didn't. I think looking back from today, I had a very happy childhood. I don't think I knew that then.
Where was your childhood?
It was around. My father was in computers, you know, until he moved from New Jersey. I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. My dad got jobs at RCA. So my childhood went from New Jersey to Phoenix, Arizona, to Palo Alto, Northern California, you know, and then back to Los Angeles, California. So my childhood has been around the country.
Who was your father?
My father is he began his life as an electrical engineer after he got out of the Air Force in '45. And my dad was on the team that invented the first data processing computer at RCA. So my dad has always been inventing and involved in computers. The irony now is, because my dad wanted me to follow in his footsteps, and I said never. I was bad at math in school, and my dad was so disappointed I was no good in math. He was a math whiz, and I was terrible at math. Now that my father's in semi-retirement at 75 years old, my father is producing films for Burroughs, a computer company, and these films are sales tools to sell their new line of machinery. And I now have 5 computers in my life, and I know how to program, and I know how to use them, and we've made a strange crossover.
What else did he give you as a scientist in your childhood? Was he showed you the sky, is that right?
My dad offered me the first chance to be curious about the stars by building me a telescope out of a carpet roll, those big cardboard carpet rolls, and he ground the glass himself. He ground a 2-inch rectangular piece of glass, and he built for me, with some parts from the Scientific Edmund Company, a reflecting telescope when I was about 7, 8 years old.
Was he an absent father or a present father?
He was an absent father, yeah.
Who was your mother? Who is your mother?
My mother is My mother is someone who is 74 years old, who is going on 25. She has the energy of, I guess, Helen Hayes, and you know, when she was in her 70s. Remember, Helen Hayes' amazing energy. She is so energetic. She's a concert pianist, and was anyway, and she runs a kosher dairy restaurant in Los Angeles, California right now.
Was there conflict between your parents?
Well, they were divorced. There was always conflict. My mother, you know, with her side of the brain, was always into the arts, and my father, with his side of the brain, was always in the sciences. And there was always sort of a clash of ideologies and culture, and I think, in a sense, my dad was a workaholic, as I am, and my mother, you know, took care of the kids, and there wasn't a lot of communication because he was always working and she was always at home.
Was that separation and that divorce upsetting to you as a child?
I wanted it to happen. I think it was upsetting looking back on it, but at the time my mother was so unhappy, and she was so close to a nervous breakdown that when my parents were divorced, I felt it had saved my mom's life, that my mom was rescued by the divorce because she was really going slowly off the deep end. And so I was really in favor of the divorce. I was old enough to hold my mom's hand as a friend of hers. When they actually were divorced, I was 17. It was much harder on my younger sisters, who were all 3 years, 2 years, and 1 year behind me, and it was much tougher on them.
How did you escape from the tensions in your parents' home as a child?
Well, I made movies. I made movies. I just hid behind a camera. It was fun.
Who gave you the camera?
My father. He didn't give it to me. I stole it. I borrowed it.
You watched movies as well as made movies?
Watched television, watched feature films when I could, go to the theater to see them made, little 8mm, you know, imitative productions when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, yeah.
What were the movies you most remember seeing in your childhood that made most impact on you?
Well, the first movie I saw was The Greatest Show on Earth. I was 3 years old in Philadelphia. My dad took me to the theater. I saw that movie, and it made a profound impression on me. Because because they had a big train wreck in The Greatest Show on Earth. 2 trains came together. Actually, not 2 trains. A train and a car hit. The train derailed, and people were hurt and killed. And I got interested in Lionel trains because of that movie. And I remember, because of The Greatest Show on Earth, when my dad got me my first train set, this is years later, I remember that movie, and then I used to use his 8mm Brownie movie camera to film train wrecks, trying to imitate the great train wreck in that film I saw at 3. And I think in a way that somehow that sort of perverse, sensational subject matter began to suck me into a hobby which became a profession.
In your teens at home, you made a very long movie, a sci-fi movie. Did you shot that yourself and cut it yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. When did you first want to direct film as a life?
I think the big seminal moment in my life was when I saw Lawrence of Arabia for the first time. You know, in 70 millimeter. First week it was showing in Phoenix, Arizona. I believe it was at the Palm Theater when it came out. And I was around, I suppose I was around 15 years old, perhaps, when it came out. 14, 15, around there. And that's when I wanted to, after that movie, after that experience, I wanted to make films, not just as a hobby, but I wanted to go into the profession. And I began looking for ways to do that.
Did you ever tell David Lean that?
Of course, yeah.
You made a film called Amblin that was a kind of calling card, and instantly were hired by television. What did you learn directing for television, movies for television?
What did I learn? Expediency, planning, storyboarding. You had to be on time, they didn't give you the second job. If you did a TV show and you were half a day over schedule, that was such a war crime that you weren't allowed to do another TV, especially if you were young like I was. And I was kind of breaking into a system that was still populated by the old guard of the old Hollywood. I mean, the average age of my film crews, when I was 21 years old and first starting out in television, the average age of my crews were 62 years old. They had seen all the great movies. They had made the Clark Gable films and the Victor Fleming films and the Michael Curtiz films. They had been there in the heyday of Hollywood, and they were just close to retirement. And I show up at 21 years old with acne to direct Joan Crawford. It was one of those things where I didn't have a lot of friends. There was a big generation gap on those 8 days I shot, and I knew that I had to be on time, because if I wasn't, I wouldn't work again. I was 2 days over schedule on that first thing I did with Joan Crawford on this TV show, and I didn't work for a year. When I got my second job a year later, and I was an old man at 22, and I was given a Marcus Welby with Robert Young to direct, I planned every shot on paper so meticulously that I came in a half a day ahead of schedule, and I consistently worked in television from that day on.
You made a movie called Duel, which was a great success, particularly perhaps in Europe. A movie with very little dialogue. I mean, it's pictures that tell stories in movies, right?
Yes. Pictures tell stories, yes. Words tell stories. You know, too, my emphasis has always been on pictures, and because I wasn't much of a reader when I was growing up, I think I was much more of a picture maker than I was a reader. And now I'm kind of on the side of reading and the side of literature, and I think that David Lean was the filmmaker who proved that literature, great literature, and great visuals can combine, you know, to make Bridge of the River Kwai, you know, Breaking the Sound Barrier. I mean, he really proved that you could merge literature and imagery in one.
You were part of what was thought of as a new generation of movie makers in Hollywood. Somebody called you the movie brats. Were you conscious that you were changing things, that you were part of a new wave, or not?
No, not at the time. You know, I mean, I was conscious of when people began writing about it, and George Lucas and Francis Coppola and myself, and we were all reading about Scorsese, we were all reading about ourselves, that we were part of a wave. At the time, we didn't.
Was it because you were young, you think, that this was said of you?